The Galactic Council panicked. Humans don't start wars, they end them. The chamber of the Verdant Accord had not gone silent like this in 900 years. Ambassador Krell Voss of the Thasari Hive stood frozen mid-gesture, his forearms locked in the air, as the holographic display above the council floor flickered from blue to a pulsing, furious red. On it, a single human fleet, 11 ships, no more, had just annihilated the combined battle line of 3 Skarn War-Clans in under 4 minutes. 4 minutes. A conflict that had raged for 11 standard years, ended in the time it took to brew a cup of tea. "That is not possible," whispered Ambassador Ione Threll, the council's youngest delegate, her feathered crest flattening in shock. The Skarn Armada had 43 capital ships, reinforced hulls, kinetic shielding rated for war, rasped the Thasari elder beside her, not for whatever that was. On the display, the human flagship, a vessel no one in the room had a name for, because it had not existed in any registry 6 hours earlier, drifted through the wreckage of the Skarn fleet like it hadn't noticed a battle had occurred at all. But none of this had begun that way. 3 days earlier, the situation had seemed almost boring. The Skarn War-Clans, a proud and brutal confederation of 6-limbed warriors who measured honor in territory conquered, had been slowly grinding down the small human colony of Meridian's Rest for the better part of a decade. It wasn't strategic, it wasn't even personal, it was tradition. The Skarn expanded, or they died as a culture. Meridian's Rest, a farming colony of 800,000 souls, simply happened to sit on a shipping lane the Skarn wanted. The Galactic Council had done what it always did, convened, debated, and drafted a strongly worded resolution. Humanity, a species that had only held a seat on the council for 6 years, had done something else. They had sent a single diplomat. His name was Elias Cho, and he carried no weapons, no fleet, and, according to Skarn scouts, no fear. "You will withdraw a token force," Cho told the Skarn war chief Draug'tha aboard the enemy flagship, standing alone in a room full of armed warriors twice his height. "You will return to your original border, and you will do it before the next lunar cycle of your homeworld." Draug'tha laughed, a sound like grinding stone. "And why would the Skarn clans yield anything to a species that sends one unarmed man to speak for it?" Cho's answer was quiet. "Because I'm the last polite request you're going to get." The chamber roared with laughter. Cho was escorted off the ship without incident. The Skarn considered killing an unarmed messenger beneath their honor, a fact that would matter enormously in 6 days. He had overlooked one crucial detail. Draug'tha assumed humanity's confidence was bluff. Every species that had ever faced the Skarn clans came either begging or burning. This species had sent one man who spoke like the outcome was already decided. He should have listened more carefully to how decided Cho sounded. Back on the council floor 3 days later, Ambassador Threll finally found her voice. "Someone explained to me," she said, "how a species with a civilian population smaller than the Skarn military alone just erased 4 decades of accumulated Skarn naval doctrine in single engagement. The Skarn delegate to the council, a war-clan cousin named Vrask, present only because his people had insisted on council membership as a formality they never respected, stood up so fast his chair clattered backward. 'This is fabricated,' he snarled. 'No fleet of that size holds that firepower. It is a trick, a hologram, human theater.' 'Then explain,' said the Thasari elder dryly, 'why War Chief Draug'tha has not responded to Skarn clan communications in 6 hours. Vrask's mandibles clicked shut. Everything changed in the next few seconds. A new transmission request lit up the display, not from the Skarn, not from a council member, but flagged with human diplomatic credentials. The chamber's ambient chatter died instantly. Elias Cho's face appeared, calm, tired, standing in what looked like a modest ship's briefing room, not a war room. "Council," he said, "I apologize for the interruption to your session. I wanted to deliver this in person rather than let you learn it secondhand." Ambassador Cho, Threll managed. The engagement at the Kesh corridor. 11 ships against 43. The reports are calling it a massacre. Kao's expression didn't change. "It was a rescue operation." The chamber stirred. "A rescue?" Vrask spat. 43 Skarn capital ships were reduced to debris. 31, Cho corrected gently. 12 surrendered when we disabled their weapons array and offered evacuation pods. Their crews are alive. We're returning them to Skarn territory within the week, along with War Chief Draug'tha, who is currently in our medical bay recovering from a fractured mandible he sustained boarding our flagship to personally negotiate terms. Silence. Nobody knew what the human was hiding.
"You boarded their flagship,"
Threll repeated slowly. "During an active engagement, Draug'tha requested a private surrender," Cho said. "Skarn honor doesn't allow surrender broadcast to his own crew. We accommodated the request. It seemed like the decent thing to do. What the council did not yet understand, what would take another 2 hours of increasingly uncomfortable testimony to unpack, was why 11 human ships had annihilated a fleet nearly 4 times their size in under 4 minutes, with almost no human casualties. It wasn't superior weapons, though the humans' kinetic lance arrays were, admittedly, a full technological generation ahead of anything the Skarn fielded. It wasn't superior numbers, they'd had none. It wasn't even superior tactics, though those had certainly helped. It was that humanity had stopped treating this as a war to be fought, and started treating it as a problem to be solved. Commander Aisha Reyes, captain of the human flagship Steadfast. Mercy gave her own account to the council an hour later, standing in her ship's uniform, still faintly smelling of ozone from the battle. "We didn't come to fight a war," she said. "We came to end one. There's a difference, and the Skarn didn't understand it until it was too late for them to adjust." "Explain," Vrask demanded, though his tone had lost most of its earlier venom. "A war has an opponent you're trying to outlast," Reyes said. "You grind, you attrit, you wait for the other side to run out of will or resources. That takes years. We've watched Meridian's rest bleed for a decade because everyone treated this as a war to be managed instead of a problem to be closed out. The truth stunned the entire galaxy, and it hadn't even been said yet. So instead," Reyes continued, "we identified the actual objective. Not defeat the Skarn fleet. The objective was stop the suffering at Meridian's rest, permanently, with the fewest lives lost on every side, including theirs. Once you define the problem that way, the fleet composition, the tactics, the timeline, all of it reorganizes around ending it as fast and as cleanly as possible. You call disabling 31 ships and boarding a flagship clean," Vrask said. "I call 12,000 living Skarn crew members going home to their families clean, compared to the alternative your war clans were planning, which was besieging Meridian's rest until the colony starved," Reyes said, and for the first time her voice hardened. "We read your fleet's supply logs after the engagement, Ambassador. Your people were provisioning for an 18-month siege, 18 months of 800,000 civilians running out of food. We had 4 hours to stop that from becoming irreversible, so we did. The council had made a terrible mistake, and they were only beginning to realize it." Threll leaned forward. 4 hours, You're saying you built a battle plan capable of defeating a fleet 4 times your size in 4 hours? "No," Reyes said. "We'd had that plan ready for 6 months. We just hoped we'd never need to use it." That admission did more to silence the chamber than the battle report had. "You mean to tell us," the Thasari elder said slowly, "that your species has been quietly preparing a war-ending contingency against the Skarn clans since before this council even knew the conflict had escalated?" "We prepare contingencies for every conflict within 3 jumps of a human settlement," Reyes said. "Not because we want to fight them. Because we've learned that hoping a war ends itself gets people killed. We'd rather have the plan sitting unused in a drawer for 10 years than need it, and not have it." Vrask's crest had gone an ashen gray, a Skarn expression the council had learned, over the years, to associate with something close to fear. "Then this was never truly a rescue. It was a demonstration." "It was both," Cho said quietly, rejoining the conversation. "We genuinely have preferred a diplomatic resolution. That's why I went in person, unarmed, and gave Draug'tha every chance to withdraw peacefully. He chose not to take it. What happened next wasn't punishment, Ambassador Vrask. It was consequence. Those are different things, and I'd ask the council to remember the difference, because it matters for what happens next." The queen suddenly froze. Except there was no queen in this story, only Vrask, whose entire clan standing now rested on a war his cousin had lost in 4 minutes, and who understood, with dawning horror, that the story would follow him home. The final twist came not from the humans, but from an unexpected quarter. War Chief Draug'tha himself requested to address the council, remotely from the human medical bay, his jaw wired shut from the fracture, speaking through a translator implant with visible difficulty. "I came to this council," he said, each word costing him effort, "to demand recognition of humanity as a threat requiring collective containment. I no longer make that request." The chamber leaned in. "I fought the humans believing they were soft," Draug'tha continued. "Their diplomat came alone, unarmed. I mistook restraint for weakness. It was not weakness. It was a species that has learned precisely how much force is necessary, and refuses to use 1 gram more than that. They ended my war in 4 minutes and preserved 12,000 of my crew in the process. That is not the behavior of a threat to be contained." He paused. "It is the behavior of a species you never ever want as your enemy, and that you would be fortunate to have as your ally." Vrask stared at his own war chief's face on the display and said nothing. But that wasn't even the biggest surprise of the day. Commander Reyes stepped forward one final time. Council, before you deliberate, Meridian's Rest has already sent formal word to the Skarn clans, through us. They're offering the shipping lane access that started this conflict, not as tribute, as a trade agreement negotiated as equals, backed by a colony that no longer has to negotiate from fear. Why? Threll asked, genuinely baffled. Would you hand your enemies exactly what they wanted after defeating them? Because the lane was never worth a decade of dead colonists, Reyes said. And because a peace that leaves the other side humiliated isn't peace. It's a war with a pause button. We didn't come here to make an enemy for the next 50 years. We came to close the book on this one permanently for everybody, including them. The session adjourned 4 hours later, far past its scheduled end. No resolution was drafted that day. None was needed. Word of the Kesh corridor engagement spread through council space faster than any diplomatic cable could travel. Not as a story of conquest, but of something far more unsettling to species who had spent millennia calculating war in terms of attrition and grudges. A species that fought only when necessary, only as much as necessary, and then simply stopped, offering the survivors a hand up rather than a boot on the neck. Ambassador Threll found Elias Cho in the observation deck after the session, watching the stars in silence. They're afraid of you now, she said. All of them. Even the ones who weren't in that chamber. They shouldn't be, Cho said. Why not? He turned to look at her, and for the first time all day, something like sadness crossed his face. Because fear makes people defensive, and defensive people make mistakes that start the next war. We didn't do any of this to be feared, Ambassador. We did it because Meridian's Rest deserved to stop being afraid. If the price of that is that the rest of the galaxy is a little uneasy around us for a while, I can live with that. What I couldn't live with was watching 800,000 people starve, while this council debated the wording of its next resolution. Threll had no answer for that. She simply stood beside him, watching the same stars, understanding for the first time exactly what the galaxy had let onto its council 6 years ago. Not a conquering empire, and not a soft pacifist curiosity, but something rarer and far more dangerous to anyone who mistook kindness for weakness. A species that would rather end a war in 4 minutes than let it drag on for 4 more years, and would spend the rest of its strength making sure the peace that followed actually held. The Galactic Council had panicked that day, and in the years that followed, they would come to understand exactly why. Humans didn't start wars, they ended them, and then stayed to make sure they never had to be fought again.